job interview is one of the most anxiety-provoking situations most people can find themselves in, even when they go to plan. But what happens when you have your worst interview ever? Our guests share their worst interviews ever in the hope that you will take something from their mistakes to have a more successful interview outcome. Some of the stories are horrific and some are just downright embarrassing. Let's join our host, Kevin O'Reilly, the interview skills coach with over 25 years experience in the fields of coaching and recruitment. Let's welcome our guests to the show.
Today we have on the show Danny Banks, District Director for District 71 for Toastmasters International, the largest not-for-profit public speaking organisation in the world. In his previous life, he was a head of department in a secondary school in the UK. And Danny believes that being a good communicator is crucial to any career and job. Danny, you're very, very welcome today on the show.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks very much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it.
Great. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. There's going to be so much to be taken away from today, especially with regards to any teachers that might be listening, any newly qualified teachers, and just anybody who wants to be better at communicating.
Yeah, hopefully. In my teaching career, it was 27 years and I started back in the 90s. It was a different world then. We didn't have the social media that we've got now. And we didn't have a lot of help that we get now. I would have loved something like interview skills coach or Toastmasters to ask, because I have never been confident in interviews and I've absolutely hated interviews, to be honest with you. And I think if there had been more help, if I'd have been able to go to Toastmasters or a service like yours, then I think my career would have been very different. I would have perhaps made different choices and gone in a different route, but it wasn't there. And that's it. That's it, the way it is. And I would advise people, don't struggle on your own. Go and get help. If you like me and hated interviews and got really stressed about them, go and get some help. There's help. You're available. Go and find a Toastmasters club. Toastmasters is not just about making speeches. It's about communication, interpersonal communication. If I'd have learned I've learned in Toastmasters how to structure a speech, that can be applied exactly to answering interview questions. And that would have helped me so much in my career. But as I say, it is as it is. And, please, if you want my one piece of advice, go and get help. Don't struggle on your own. Don't sit there looking at a mirror, talking to yourself or videoing yourself. Go and get some help and join a club like Toastmasters or help from you.
Yeah, and I've heard that quite a bit, Danny, with regards to that, talking in front of a camera and talking in front of a mirror. It's all well and good to do that, but if you don't have the background experience or skills to understand what it is you're actually looking for and what it is you need to hear back, then you're basically talking to yourself.
Absolutely. And the feedback as well,
Yeah.
I'm sure you do mock interviews for people and you get the feedback. At Toastmasters, you come along, you will get feedback on everything. So, you can record yourself on a video, but it's only you that's going to be looking at that video.
Yeah.
So you're not going to spot any mistakes or improvements that you could make just by looking at a video or practicing looking in the mirror. You need somebody to feedback and somebody with experience.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. I think it's probably the most important out of any of the coaching, out of any of the Toastmasters, and as you know, I'm a Toastmaster myself, and the feedback that is the most important for me.
Yeah, I mean, when I was sort of in the middle 90s, when I was looking, I got promoted to head of a subject, and then I eventually got head of department. But I went through so many interviews that just crashed and were horrible. And every horrible interview I had made me more afraid for the next one. And so I did try and ask for advice. I asked at school. I asked the head of drama. And she said, well, perhaps wear a mustache and make an entrance when you go in. I said, I'm going for an interview, not, appear at Stratford on Avon in a Shakespeare. And I approached the union that I was in, but they had nothing. And it just seemed to be that at that time, there was very little help. When we did have one mock interview when I was a student, when I did my teaching certificate, we had one mock interview as a group, and people volunteered to be interviewed. That was it. And I think it's, the essence of interviews is communication skills.
That's it. That's it.
I think in a nutshell, yeah.
Yeah. And it's those, well, and I don't like to use this term, those soft skills.
No.
What I always say is it's the hard technical skills that get you in the interview, as in what you're good at, your skill set, your experiences. They will all get you to the interview. But to get the job, you need to be better at those soft skills, or as I call them, important essential skills.
Yeah,
Because
I totally agree.
if you can't communicate that during that interview process, it doesn't matter what your experience says on paper, you won't get through. And I was doing a bit of research recently within the job description, within one of the big recruiters in Northern Ireland, and they had said they have over 200,000 applications, and the word communication is mentioned in every single one of them.
Absolutely. And, having been a teacher for 27 years and having worked with undergraduates, I interviewed for the training course, the education training course at Warwick University. And just because somebody gets into higher education, we can't assume that they've got good communication skills. No. They might be very academic. They may be very good at their studies and writing essays and all that sort of thing. But in today's world, communication is king. We're doing this on a podcast. You're in Northern Ireland, I'm in the middle of England. Years ago, it wouldn't have been possible. Now it is. So people have to learn to communicate through this media. And every job requires communication skills. Somebody works in a shop, they have to be able to talk to customers. I mean, you can't have somebody who just is a shy and doesn't respond to customers. You've got to have somebody who can communicate. So I agree with you. I don't think it's a soft skill. I think it's an essential skill.
Yeah. And I think that's becoming more and more aware. And I would do a lot of work with schools and students who are about to go into university or into the world of work. And their soft skills need a lot of work. They need a lot of work. And you know what? I don't know if that's because of COVID, and I don't know if it's because of the phone usage that we currently have, and the kids being able to, or the students being able to text and message each other without even having to open their mouth. I think there's almost that going forwards but going backwards in the same sense. And it's more and more prevalent when we go into any of the Toastmaster clubs and we hear the people that are sitting in front of us. I know that in our club we have doctors, we have politicians, we have cleaners, we have IT specialists, we have students, we have a full spectrum of people within different industries across different sectors. So it does affect everybody. Although some people it doesn't affect as much.
Yeah, I think with social media, it's a double-edged sword like everything else. People tend to spend time on the phone and I've got a couple of dogs and I go walk every morning and I regularly see people just walking down the road with the phone, and they might be walking a dog, but they're looking at the phone. Or mum's pushing or dad's pushing the push chairs and they're looking at the phone. And I was talking to somebody the other day who just bought a new pushchair, and there's actually a piece of equipment on the pushchair where you can put your phone and your coffee cup, which is a relevant invention. And I just think people are communicating. People are communicating, whether it's text, Facebook, whatever, and that's really good. People are communicating. What we've got to make sure is that communication turns into verbal communication as well. That what you can abbreviate on a text, I mean, I can't. I still have to write every word out because I don't know the abbreviations, but that's my. But people are communicating, and I think communicating more now than 20 years ago. And I think that's a good thing. We just need to make sure we don't lose the oral communication, to be able to talk to a group of people, to be able to talk like we're talking now,
Yeah,
not texting each other or emailing each other.
yeah,
And I'm happy that people are communicating more because I think that's brilliant. But we don't want to lose the oral we
yeah.
tradition. We want to keep, people talking and presenting because you can't present to a group on a WhatsApp.
No,
You
and
know, how,
you know yourself, Danny, as well, that there's a lot of power in someone standing in front of you and talking. It can create that emotion which
Mm,
text cannot do very well. It can create a real feeling and depth. And even just using a different pace or a different tone or a different volume in
absolutely.
places creates so much impact that
Mm,
a text message can't do that. An email can't do that. Even a well edited cut video, yes, it potentially could do that, but then
mm.
you're losing that socialness, that personalness of it all. That being
Yes.
in the same
Yeah.
room, being able to watch people's
Mm.
body language and interact and feel their energy.
That's a very good point. And as you know, in Toastmasters, we have contests, and during COVID, they had to go online. Now we're back face to face, which has provided some problems. But if you if you're delivering a speech in a contest, let's say, if you're delivering it to a screen, like I would be now,
Hmm.
there's no feedback you can get. You can't see, I mean, people's microphones are switched off, so you can't, if you're trying to be humorous, you can't hear whether they're laughing. You can't
Hmm.
hear where any of those cues that you would have in a room are gone. So being able to speak in public, you have an audience that gives you feedback constantly.
Yeah.
So you're working with that. If it's on a screen, and certainly texting or emailing, you cannot get the emotion, you cannot get the energy, you can't get the understanding. If somebody doesn't understand in an audience, they can put the hand up and ask you.
Yeah.
If it's on an email, you have to get back to an email and then you email them back, and things get lost in writing.
I
Whereas
think
if you can
I think so.
explain things, so much
Yeah.
easier.
Yeah, I absolutely think that is correct, and I think sometimes if you have something that you want to say that's important, you should lift the phone. You should go on to a call like we're doing right now,
Definitely.
and
Mm,
and you should have the conversation because there's
mm,
lots of those cues that we pick up on naturally, but we can't do that. It's almost like we need to learn how to translate differently via a text
yeah.
or an email, which
Mm,
is another skill in itself.
mm,
Even presenting on line is a skill in itself. And we talked about the energy
yeah.
and those reactions and the reflections back from the audience.
Mm,
I know that whenever I present online, I have to bring 100% of the energy, which is quite tiring for a presenter to
mm,
do that all the time. But when you're in a physical room, you only need to
yeah.
bring about 60,
Yeah.
70%, and the audience provides the rest. So there's a real good
Yeah.
balance.
And as well, if you're in a room and there's a break, you can actually talk to different people and there's lots of conversations can be going on. If
Yeah.
you've got 30 people on a Zoom call, you can only have two people in a conversation, really, can't you? You
Well,
can't
that's
really
it,
have
isn't it?
lots of conversations going on.
Yeah.
So I think it's Zoom and things are necessary, and I think people have got to learn the techniques of being on Zoom, because I do know a lot of interviewers now are online,
Yeah.
and you've got to learn, where your space is, this little box you're in,
Yeah.
how you can use your hands, and all those things that we learn at Toastmasters, talking to a group of people. You've got to try and learn how to apply them to this Zoom or Teams or whatever you use experience,
Yeah.
to try and get your message across, but
Yeah.
realize
It's
its
very difficult.
limitations.
It's
Sorry.
it's very, very difficult in
Yeah.
in that sense of trying to understand almost the expectations. It actually comes right down to the psychology of individuals and how that works. We're sitting here now, and had we been doing this call 24 months ago, my hands would have been everywhere on the screen. But
Mm,
knowing what I know now, we shouldn't really have our hands on screen because they're too distracting. Because
mm.
you're focusing on the hands as opposed to what I'm saying. So that's
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
another little tip that changes how
Mm,
you come across, even professionally, if you're on a
mm.
Teams call, or even how the angle of the camera is
Well, I was just
huge,
thinking as you said that
huge.
in the first days of Zoom, we saw a lot of heads, didn't we? Like this, and now we still see some of them, but
No, what,
it's a little bit better now.
what I'm starting to see and notice more so is what I like to call the caves of doom, where we see up people's nostrils because
Oh,
it's
you
usually
made
a
me aware
laptop.
now. I forgot
Yeah,
to do
it's,
that.
it's usually a laptop that's sitting on a desk that people are looking down at,
Yeah, yeah.
and they don't know where to look within that.
Mhm.
You know, there has been all sorts of inventions, little cameras you stick on the screen and so on, but the best thing to do is look at the camera yourself.
Mhm.
Very difficult, very difficult,
It
and that's
is.
easy.
I will testify to that.
Well, I have a little, I have a little tip I always give people. As humans, we have this innate ability to want to catch someone's eye when we're talking to them. It's just
Yeah.
something that we always want to do. It's sometimes it's to do with we want to make sure that someone's heard or they've acknowledged what we've said. So I will always suggest that if somebody has little post-it notes, that they draw two eyes on them and stick them at each side of the camera. Because
Oh,
when there are eyes, we tend to look that direction.
oh, that's a good idea.
So it's a
I should
tiniest
take a
little
note
tip.
of that. Thank you, Kevin.
Oh, right, okay,
Post-it
okay.
note, eyes.
Yeah. And it's so
Yeah,
simple, but it's so effective.
yeah, yeah. And but people have had to learn these techniques, haven't they, over
Yes.
really I mean, for me, I think it was happening slowly
Yes.
online and Zoom, but obviously the COVID pushed it that much faster and caused it, to be a sort of go-to now, really, isn't it, for
Yeah.
a lot of organizations.
And as you
I
quite rightly
mean,
said, a lot of organizations are going online for interviews. So a lot of them will do a telephone interview, then the first interview after
mm,
that will be online. And it's to do with cost saving and time saving.
mm, yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, even a lot of the colleges now, they are all
Okay.
online if they're doing interviews, but they do it slightly different. They do it on a different type of platform that you're talking to yourself, and it's recorded and then someone watches it back
Oh.
at their time and at their pleasure and leisure. I think it's okay in the sense of
Mm,
it makes it more flexible for everybody involved,
yeah.
but it really
Mm,
draws out the process.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, my son did an application, and all the interviews were online. He
Hmm.
never actually was face to face with anybody.
Okay.
And whilst I can understand that in terms of cost and convenience, I still think you lose something by not meeting the person because
Yeah.
there's so much if you're talking to somebody face to face, the non-verbal cues that you're picking up. Are they nervous? Do they seem a little bit reticent? Why are they not giving the full answer?
Hmm.
Why are they holding back certain things? You can see that through body language, which you cannot at the moment on a Zoom call. So I understand why organizations do it, and I think it's completely okay. But I think at some stage, if you whittle it down to four candidates, let's say, I think
Yeah.
it's always better to meet them in person.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I think it has its place, the
Hmm.
online and telephone, but the in person is so much better with regards to getting a feel, and that's the word I'm using, getting a feel for someone.
Yeah,
Because if I am working with you, Danny, for 40, 50 hours a week, then I need to feel that we can work together.
yeah, yeah.
And there has to be that feeling that we can work together.
Mm.
You can't get that via this coldness of a virtual interview online. You can
Oh,
only get that in the room because you pick up on it. It's your subconscious actually picking up on some of the hidden things that we don't actually see logically, but our subconscious picks up on it from our experiences in the past. So it could be the smell of someone, it could be the way someone
Yeah,
talks or pronounces something, it could be how someone carries themselves, how
yeah,
anything at all. And we all have unconscious bias,
absolutely.
and we all try to put that to the side, but it's still there.
Mm,
And the more and more I speak with interview panels, the more it becomes really evident that they need to be instructed on how to remove that bias going in, or at least be aware of that bias going in, so that
yeah.
it doesn't affect the decision at the time. But
Mm,
there's always going to be one of those times, Danny, where you've you've been on the interview panel back in the day of teaching, and two candidates have been absolutely amazing.
yeah.
What separates them for you? What why does candidate A get it and not candidate B, but both are amazing? Both are what you're wanting and what
Mm,
the school needs.
mm. I think one thing springs to mind is that nowadays, if you go for an interview and you're down to three, you're expected to actually teach a lesson.
Hmm.
Certainly, I was a governor and I interviewed for head teacher, and we made the head teachers teach a lesson
Hmm.
because that's the bread and butter. If you can't get information across to a group of kids, then that's the essence of teaching, developing, bringing out something in the children and learning. And you can ask lots of questions that might get to that. But actually, when you see somebody practice it, I mean, it was only like a 10-minute, 15-minute session. And,
Yeah.
it is false because you've got like a guinea pig class that have the same lesson three times and, might get a bit bored of it. But that tells you a lot. So if you've got two candidates that have got the same qualifications, the same work experience, answer the questions really well, it's a it's an opportunity to see how they interrelate with children. But it's also interesting to see during the breaks when they're perhaps in the staff room having a cup of tea or something like that. How do they react to people? Do they, the little body cue, the little non-verbal cues I was talking about? If you're an interviewer, you try to look, rightly or wrongly, but you try to look for, how do they react to people? How do they go and talk to somebody? Do they go and freeze in a corner? Um, and things like that, I think are what you have to try and make the difference. And if you're the, let's say you're interviewing for a deputy head and you're the head, what you've just said about getting on with people, you might feel that one candidate is somebody that you could get along with and work with better than the other. And it's perhaps not nothing you can write down. It's just a
Yeah.
feeling. It's just, from talking to them, from interacting with them, that yeah, this person's got the edge because I feel that I could work with them better than this person. And I know it's not necessarily scientific, but
Hmm.
as you said before, if you've got a deputy head, let's say in a school, in a primary school, it's even more important because they're not only a deputy head, they're teaching as well. So
Yeah.
it's a very busy job, and you've got to rely on that person to stand in for you. If it's a very, very important role, and you've got to be able to work with them. And I think you can only do that by spending some time with them
Yeah.
and picking up on those clues, really. I can't think of another way that you could do it.
Yeah.
If they're that close academically and um, in terms of work experience, then I think it's got to be things like, which one would I be able to work with better?
Yeah. And would that even go as far as pushing into what values they may have, and how those
Yeah.
values even align with your own values?
Mm.
Especially if you're going to be the one working with them and for them, as even opposed to the company's values or the organization's values or the school's values.
Yeah. Yes, that's a really good point. I think obviously, I mean, no school is the same. We've got,
Mm.
I don't know how many, 30,000 secondary schools or something like that in the UK. and they're all different, and all the primary schools are different. They've all got their own ethos. They've all got their own set of values. One might be a church school. One might be um, what we call a Montessori school. It was an educationalist, and
Hmm.
a very different ethos about teaching to a school where they might be in rows and um, not at groups and more independent work. So you have got to, you've got to find somebody. It's no use appointing somebody who's been used to and has the values of a Montessori school, which is very much student-led education. Children learn at their own pace, very individual, to a state school where you have got a wide variety of abilities and backgrounds, and it's more regimented. I mean,
Mm.
I don't mean, you line them up and march them, but it has to be more structured.
Yeah.
And so you need to look at the values of the teacher. Yeah, we want to be student-centered, so that it's the students' learning that's important. But are we going to do that by just letting the child roam around and pick up and do what they like? Or are we doing it in terms of, well, this is the subject matter that they've got to get, they've got to do multiplication in maths. How are we going to teach that? You know, um, and so the values do matter so much. And I think it's in all interviews, but certainly, you look at a school, and if you're investing in a deputy head teacher, let's say, it's not just the money, it's the fact that they are an important role in that school. There's only one deputy, and they
Mm.
have to stand in for you. So I don't say that they have to be a copy of you, but they have to look at problems in a similar way that you would look at them, and look at
Yeah.
solutions in that way, and have the values, if dealing with parents or dealing with a child that's just not behaving, how,
Yeah.
there are lots of ways to handle that. How does that score? And I think
And
people have to be, with those values.
yeah, and if you were to say one value is probably your most important value for you, and one that you'd like to see in potential new teachers, what would that be?
I think that they have to obviously put children's learning first.
Okay.
Now, that might sound silly, but at a secondary school, people are experts in a topic and then they train as a teacher, if you see
Okay.
the difference. So you might
Yeah.
be a mathematician and a very good mathematician, you decide to teach and you do a teacher training. So you're teaching a subject.
Mm.
There's always a bit of a joke, in secondary, teachers are teaching a subject. In primary, they're teaching children, when in
Okay.
fact, everybody's teaching children. In primary school, you very often get teachers who've done a degree in primary education. So they are more child focused.
Okay.
And certainly in secondary, I would like to see, if I were interviewing somebody who can put the subject aside and see that not everybody's a mathematician, and their job is to try and make maths understandable to
Mm.
somebody who's absolutely hopeless at maths.
Yeah.
That's their task. They're
Yeah.
teaching children. They're not necessarily teaching a subject. It happens to be mathematics, but they've got to put that in a way that the majority of children get it and understand it. And it's the
I
same with
think
any
that
subject.
yeah, and it is the responsibility of the teacher as the communicator, that if that if that student doesn't understand, then that's the failure on the behalf of the communicator.
Mm,
Because communication is the responsibility of the person delivering the communication, not the person receiving it.
yeah. Yeah. I once remember I went to a training course to prepare for Ofsted, and the guy who was leading it was on an office, the office for
Yes,
standards
yes.
in education, the inspectorate. And he was a maths specialist, and he went into a school, and he was from a Catholic background, and he was inspecting the Catholic schools for the Catholic ethos. And he went to one teacher who was a maths teacher, and he said, "Well, how do you develop you know, the Catholic ethos. And the teacher said, "Oh no, you want the RE department? They're down the corridor. They do that." He said, "But no, you do that as well. You're, you know, do you see what I'm saying?" So
Yeah. It's that golden thread that links it all together.
yeah, it's not just you're not just teaching subjects, you are actually teaching children, and whether it's mathematics, whether it's English, whether it's PE, art, whatever, it's your role to try to make it some very difficult concepts understood by that age, and
Yeah.
teaching is that skill of trying to take that and help this, you know, help Fred do it, help Frida do it. And they're coming from all sorts of backgrounds. You've got some kids who are whiz at maths. They're fantastic. They're like little computers. And then there are some that are sort of like, you know, stare out the window and away with the fairies at the time.
Yeah.
You've got to try, and they don't always succeed. But so for me, that would be a key thing. How do they try to communicate their subject so that the majority can understand it and develop and you know, use that in their life?
Yeah. And
Um,
that's a skill in itself, being able to do
Absolutely.
that. And I wonder, is that maybe something that would help potential future educators stand out even more so in a interview
Mhm.
process, is being able to communicate that and explain that very
Absolutely.
difficult concept
Mhm.
during the interview process to
Mhm.
help the interviewers understand that they are child centric, they are student focused, but they also know how to get the best out of people, how to put things
Yeah.
into context. Because there's no point in, you or I going into a secondary school now and talking about something that was relevant in our generation, and then that completely switches off the students.
Mhm.
So we have to make everything very relevant.
Yeah, and also thinking about what we talked about previously about social media. If
Mm,
you're going into a classroom today and you don't understand social media, you're at a disadvantage. Fortunately, most teachers who are coming through are of that generation that know
yeah.
about social media and all the rest of it. When I started, there was no social media. We had perhaps 200 computers for a school that got 2,000 kids. We still had blackboards, and you know, in the last 30, 40 years, that has changed drastically. So you also need people who are comfortable with using interactive whiteboards
Mm,
and that sort of thing. Um, so again, you would need that, but then I think most people who are training now are of an age where they do understand the technology. I mean, I started using an interactive whiteboard for the very first time about 2014, and the students helped me because I didn't know how a lot of it worked because they've been using it since primary school.
yeah.
You know, going up and moving things around with a finger and pressing this and that. They understood it and they were teaching me. So I think you've got to be, you've got to have whatever your subject, you know, it's PE, it's French, it's whatever, you've got to have that knowledge as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and quite rightly, I think if our listeners are taking anything away from today, it is about that knowledge and understanding around the school, its ethos, the people within it, the students within it, doing a lot of research into the schools as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
But
I,
I'm sure you've had some people that have walked into you at some stage, Danny, and you've been sitting there as an interview panelist, and you've thought, "Wow, what is happening here right now?" And it hasn't been the best sort of interview ever. Now, we will
mm,
get to that question eventually. What is your worst interview ever? But I'm sure you've seen some things that you think, you know what, you should not do that. That's something you shouldn't do during an interview. So, what would you say is potentially your three biggest red flags for interviewing?
I think know your school. It's what links in with what you've just said. We did have one person came along to the school and when they asked questions at the end said, and how much A level will I be teaching? Well, you'll be teaching none because we don't have any A levels in the school. They finish at 16. So that sort of put them to one side to begin with, that they're not actually bothered to find out the basics. If you're going for an interview, it's the very least to find out some of the basics of, what the school teaches, what's its ethos, and things like that. So that was a big no-no. I know we've been talking a lot about social media, but it is something which is changing the world.
Mm-hmm.
Be very careful about your social media posts because schools look at them now. Schools will find out if you're on Facebook or Instagram. And it might have been a very nice holiday you had in Malaga, and the cocktails might have been very nice, but seeing you stumbling along the road isn't a good view. So perhaps if you want an Instagram account where you can put what you like on it, have it, but have one that's a professional one. Because if I were a governor, say, and I used to be chair of governors, but it's a few years ago, and I was interviewing just not a deputy or head, a classroom teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And I went on their Facebook and there were pictures of them, celebrating merrily away or whatever. That would think to me, well, what image is that going to send out to parents? Because parents will look as well. If
Yeah.
they've got a class teacher, in an infant school and a primary school, you've got children for a year. You are their main adult in schools. They are the main relationships you form. And
Yeah.
and parents, a lot of parents will go on social media, and it's not just the interviewer, but they'll go on and look. And if they see that, they will think, well, what have I let my children I've left my
Yeah.
children in their charge, in their I've forgotten the word we used for it, but that teacher is their loco parentis, their parent when the parent's not there. Are you happy to let your parent see that? So if
Yeah.
you've got an Instagram or a Facebook and things like that, try and hide that or make it private. I think you can, I know you can do that on Facebook, but
Yeah.
I don't know about Instagram. So that would be my second thing. So think about the sorts of things you're putting out there. And I think the third thing is linking back to something that we said about how you actually turn up on the day. Now, I'm not talking about dress, although smart casual is probably, whatever smart casual is probably the best way to go. There may be some schools where, being a punk or a goth might,
Mm-hmm.
if you've got a creative school, that might sort of go down well. But sometimes, just so that it doesn't distract really, because if you're asking people questions and there's 15 ear rings and a punk hairstyle, you're looking at that and you're not listening to the question, so you're not doing yourself a favor. And please don't think that I'm an old fuddy-duddy conservative. I think interviews, whatever you are, you've got to get through the interview. And if you're
Yeah.
going to be interviewed by people, you're going to be interviewed by governors who, some of them are local business people, they're local councillors who may be very traditional and conservative. And yes, you ought to be able to wear what you like, but if you want a job, sometimes you've just got to play that game. And
Absolutely.
maybe I'm wrong to say it's a game, but you've got to look the part so you get the part. And
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right, because
don't expect people to dress up in three-piece suits and top hats or whatever just to be smart. So that's one thing you don't have to worry about.
yeah.
And
And you're right what you said about it being a game. Like any game, there's always rules.
Mm,
And it doesn't matter who you are, you have to sort of play by those rules. Now, you can straddle
yeah.
the line of the rule, you can
Mm,
really straddle it. However, if you want to win, and most times an interview is a win-lose situation
yeah.
for most.
Mm,
And if you want to win at that, then you have to be playing within those rules, or at least using those rules to your advantage.
yeah.
And if one of them is not being distracting
Yeah.
because you have to think about who is on the panel, then play the
Absolutely.
game.
And I know what you're saying about we've got biases and things, and we shouldn't be biased, and we should look through that. And I absolutely agree with that. And I'm not expecting people to dress up to the nines so
Mm,
that they, you know, could be on a television interview panel, whatever. I'm just saying, don't provide a distraction for the governing body if they're interviewing for or whoever, whichever industry. I mean, there may be industries where if you turned up being looking very creative, it might be a positive. If it's a
yeah,
design company or something like that, an art company, maybe that would go down well, the
yeah.
creativity. But try not to shock people. Um, is always a good thing. And maybe, so those are sort of three things I would think about. Think about, you know, the social media aspect you've got. Think about trying to look at it as a process and see which bits you can make easier for yourself. And if
Yeah,
that's buying a suit and going in a suit, you want the job, you have to play by the
their
interview's
rules.
rules. I'm afraid. Whether that's
Yeah,
right or wrong, that is as it is. And most people do. Most people I've interviewed have done that. What they wear in their own circumstances is their issue. And just be careful with your social media because certainly in schools, it's not just the interviewers that will look at it.
yeah.
It
That's a,
is
that's a good shout, actually.
parents will look at it as well. And I suppose, I mean, my experience is in education, but I'm sure, if people are listening that are in a business, that are in perhaps a big company, you know, I'm sure that they look at things like that and look at social media.
They
Uh,
do. They do. There was a
yeah,
recent survey out that 9 out of 10 companies now use social media to whittle down the interview candidates. Now, rightly or wrongly, as we quite have said the whole way through this, this is what happens. Rightly or wrongly, this is what happens.
mm,
So, why would we not do something positive about this when we know this to be the case?
absolutely. And it also sort of links in a little bit to Toastmasters because in Toastmasters, you learn that if you're going to deliver a speech or a presentation, the most important element is the audience. So you
Yeah,
have to look at the audience and you have to construct your speech for them,
yeah,
um, or your presentation for them. So you need to look at the audience. And I think an interview is the same. If you consider the interview panel and perhaps other staff at the school, because I do know um, I've not been involved in some interviews, and when there've been interviews, the head teachers come round and said, "We're bringing the candidates round. I'd like your opinion on them." So when they say everything's part of the interview, it's not just the questions. Certainly in schools, that happens. The head will or the deputy will go around and say, "Look, these are coming round. We'd like your opinions on them. How, when they came into your class, did they talk to children? Did they just
yeah,
stand at the back?" And that does get fed back. Whether
yeah.
that's a good practice or not, I don't know, but it's there,
It's
you
a
know.
practice. Yeah, it's a practice that
Um,
happens, and I used it myself on many occasions. And but if I'm in an organization, if I've been contracted into an organization to look after their interviews, I will always ask the secretary. I will always ask the person who
yeah,
brings them in to the room,
absolutely.
how are they? How did they speak? Give me a score out of 1 to 10 around different criteria that I've set prior
Yeah.
to this. So as you quite rightly said, everything is an interview. From when you get out of your car, maybe even before that, when you get out of bed in the morning and you walk to get the
Mm,
bus or you're driving down the road, don't beep the horn at
yeah,
anybody because they could be one of the interviewers. Let people in and
absolutely.
out as you're driving down, and it's a sort of a good practice to get into that mindset. By the time you get there, you're then a little bit more relaxed as well with
Yeah.
regards to speaking to everybody as you walk
Yeah.
through, and a lovely
And
smile.
there's also a practice in schools as well where students interview
Yeah,
the candidate. And I've been on interviews where a panel of students has interviewed me. And then they feed back to the interview panel. So, you just it's right. At least when you get out your car in car park, that's when the interview starts. And
yeah,
it finishes when you get back in and drive away.
yeah,
Because certainly in a place like a school, there will be people there who are looking at you that you don't know about.
yeah. Do
And,
you know what? I think that's okay because we we can we can be trained and coached to say the right things and act the right way during the interview. However, that mask can only stay on for so long, and when we think no
yeah,
one's watching, potentially that mask will slip and the true character will come out. And like you had said, if you're in primary school and that is the only adult that you're going to see, your child will see for the next year, you at least want to be sure that when you're not there to keep eyes on them, that they will
mm,
behave in the manner that you
absolutely.
expect.
Absolutely. And it may be not be fair that, you've got these pictures on Facebook of celebration and whatever, and people are allowed to celebrate, people are
Yeah,
allowed to have a drink or two. It's life. But when you're applying for something like teaching, you've got to be aware that you have got a lot of eyes that will be looking at you, and they're not just the staff in the school and the pupils. It will be parents. It could be the local community,
yeah,
because especially in primary, some of these schools are community schools. They're part of the village, or they're part of that area.
yeah, yeah,
And I mean, I don't want to over egg it, but you know, do keep your maybe in teaching it's different. I don't know. But I can think of a lot of other jobs where you wouldn't necessarily you would look at it, and it would not be a positive thing to see that sort of thing. If you've got a company that's got a very traditional approach, whether it's a bank, or whether it's accountants, lawyers, whatever, maybe they wouldn't be too happy. I don't
yeah.
know. But
But
certainly, you asked me about teaching, and teaching, you are, as a teacher, in charge of a group of pupils. You are their parent, during the day. You're there to keep them safe. You're there to educate them. And, people want to have confidence in you.
yeah,
Uh, and that
well,
is as it is.
that's a great shout, Danny, about that social media and that association that people make with regards to what you put on to who you are and what your character is.
Mm.
So, Danny, we've come to the point in our little conversation here where we change pace ever so slightly, and this is called the quick fire round. Okay.
Oh, okay, I'm
So
ready.
this is very simply where we throw questions at you and you have to answer immediately with a simple yes, no, or pass. Okay? Nothing else, just yes, no, or pass. Are you ready?
Ready?
Good. Is it acceptable to wear pajama bottoms to a Zoom interview?
No.
Is it okay to bribe the interviewers?
No.
Is it wise to ask the interviewer for a selfie together at the end?
Pass.
Should a candidate smile during the interview?
Yes.
Should you answer the first question with the dramatic pause for effect?
No.
Should women wear high heels to an interview?
No.
Is it acceptable to ask the interviewer how much they make?
Yes.
Should you high five the interviewer at the end?
No.
Should a candidate swear during an interview?
Pass.
Is it acceptable to bring your mum to the interview for moral support?
No.
No. Okay, Danny, that's those questions done.
Although it's an idea, I never thought of.
The reason we ask these questions is because I usually asked these questions at least once a week by candidates.
Really?
Indeed. And it is always pleasing and funny to hear people's reactions around these from different sectors and sort of different levels and age ranges and even genders, because we all get a very different view of what
Mm,
their thoughts are.
yeah.
You passed on the one about the is it wise to ask the interviewer for a selfie together at the end?
Mm.
What was the thought process around the pass?
Well, I'm not so sure. Everybody takes selfies these days, and I think you just have to judge the. I think it would generally not be a good idea, but it depends on the organization. You know, as I said,
Mm,
if it was a creative organization, if it was something maybe where you were looking at creation, brand identity, that sorts of things, maybe it might not be a bad thing, but I would say generally no. And I
yeah,
wouldn't do it in schools because you shouldn't have your phone out in schools because of safeguarding procedures. Um,
good tip.
so yeah, keep your phones away if you're going for an interview in a school, because most schools have safeguarding policies about not having phones. But
Hmm.
I suppose it depends on the industry.
Yeah.
That's why
I
I
suppose
passed on that
I
one.
suppose I may even change the answers to those questions to yes, no, or depends.
Yeah.
Might be a better option with regards to
Yeah.
these.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I mean the one about high heels, I really don't think anybody has to wear high heels if they don't want to. If it's what you're comfortable in, you wear. And I don't know anybody that would necessarily be impressed by anybody wearing high heels, man
Hmm.
or woman.
As you
I
say,
I
whatever's
think,
comfortable for you.
yeah, go smart. And if you've got a pair of shoes that are comfortable to you, wear them. And, I think in my experience, the days of dressing up, you know, glamorously for an interview, I don't think it's necessary. You just need to be smart. And as I said, it takes one thing away that you've got to worry about because they're not going to be looking at you and thinking, why are they dressed like this?
Yeah. And I suppose that's a really good shout actually, is to remove as many thoughts from the interviewer's minds or confusions from the interviewer's minds so that
Mm,
they will actually listen to what you're saying as opposed to going, why are they wearing that, or why are they not wearing that, or why
mm,
did they bring that, or why did they not bring that? It's
yeah.
just understanding what it is, almost the expectations, and understanding the
Yeah.
organization's expectations.
It goes back to what I was saying about audience, know your audience.
Indeed.
When you're making a speech, you've got to know your audience. When you're making a presentation, when you're doing an interview, you've got to know your audience. Who are the audience?
Yeah.
It might be you go to an interview and it's just two people. There's nobody else interviewing you or looking at you. There's just the two. That's your audience. If you go into a school, your audience are the interviewers, but they could be the children, could be other staff. So it's just knowing your audience and what are they looking for?
Yeah.
How do they want to be spoken to? What resonates with them? What's emotional for them? Um, and yeah, just knowing your audience. And I think, if you've applied for a job, you want the job, why would you do anything that prevented you from trying to get the job? So and I know people do, but if you've applied for a job that you want, why wouldn't you find out about your audience? And I'm not saying, are they married, how many kids they got, all this sort of stuff, but about the organization, about their ethos, their values, and how you can show your synergy with that ethos and values. And I think it implies, as you know, in Toastmasters, that's the thing. Look at your audience. What do they look for? What language will they understand? What metaphors will they understand?
Mm.
Because if you go off talking in, ABC of X, Y, Z, and all this, you could lose them.
Yeah.
Um,
And you're absolutely right. It is knowing that audience that's in front of you and sort of their rough backgrounds, because you're never going to really understand and know everybody 100%, but it is worth your while to do a little bit of research on people who potentially will be on the interview panel. And that can be done
Absolutely.
very easily We've already talked about social media. That can be done very easily via social media. Everybody uses
Absolutely.
it to look up everybody
Mhm.
else, and you may as well use it to your advantage if it's going
And
to be used.
and really, you're doing the people who are interviewing you a disservice, really. If
Mm,
you know, if they've been prepared to look at your CV or whatever, and they've been prepared to call you for an interview, the least you can do is sort of do your best.
yeah,
Um, because they've seen something in you. Show them that you see something in them that you want to, that job, you want to work for them,
yeah,
and give them some credit.
absolutely. And I think you touched on a point there that some people really forget about with regards to, show them their best self. You've made the effort to apply, you've made the effort to turn up. The organization has taken the time and spent the money to do the research on you and invite you to an interview and take time out of their busy schedules. At least do the simple thing of finding out who your audience is, finding out all about the school, their ethos, what it is they hold dear. All you're doing is improving your own chances. And you're playing this game, but you're playing it really well.
Yeah, but if you want to win,
Well,
you
that's
have
it.
to know the rules, don't you?
You have to know the rules. That's it.
And you have to be
That's,
skilled at it. Um, and also perhaps as well, and I think this perhaps applies to a wide variety of jobs. You may be asked to make a presentation,
mm,
and I would practice using the equipment
yeah.
because there's nothing more stressful than you've got, I don't know, you've perhaps emailed them your presentation, but their system doesn't work with your system,
Mm,
and going back to what you wear, do something that's going to cause you the less hassle. It's the same with technology. Try to make sure that it's as simple as possible and that their system and yours works. Because I have seen interviews where we've been waiting a couple of minutes for somebody to fumble around at the front and you know get their PowerPoint or whatever on, or
yeah.
showing a video clip, and that is demonstrating that you perhaps, well, it could demonstrate you're just nervous. People are nervous. I fully
Yeah.
accept that. But it wastes time in an interview that you could be using trying to impress them.
Yeah.
So,
I agree with that as well. And it's
mm,
probably why when I go to anywhere to do anything, I'm usually there half an hour at least early
mm,
to look around, see what the technology is, to understand the layout of the room,
absolutely.
just to get a feel for the whole place. Because there
Mm,
could be a weird smell that throws you off during the interview. It could be a weird
absolutely.
noise that throws you off during the interview. But and listen,
Yeah.
I have heard these and seen these myself many, many times sitting on panels that you just pick up on one of those little facial expressions we discussed earlier and you go, they have just made a I smell something strange face.
Mm,
And the reason that may have happened is because I know that when you're doing a full day's interview, the interviewers sometimes eat in the room and
mm,
put the rubbish into the bin in the room. And then there is
yeah.
that after lunch
Mm,
musty smell that shouldn't be there.
yeah.
But Danny, we're going to get to the question of why you're actually here today, okay? And once I ask the question, I'm just going to hand it over to you.
Okay.
And of course, the question's all going to be around what has been your worst job interview ever, Danny?
Well, where do we start? One of my first interviews was possibly the one that stands out. I just after I left school, I applied for a job in a laboratory in a hospital. I'm from Chesterfield, and the hospital was in Sheffield, so it's a big teaching hospital, massive hospital. And I think memory fails me, but I think there were 12 people on the interview panel, and they
Wow.
were all lined up behind a desk, sat there. And I walked in, and it was my first interview. And I just saw these 12, and I just didn't know what to do. Who do I talk to? Who do I look at? What? And it was a disaster. It just, I saw all these faces, and they asked me questions. And once you start to panic, it's very difficult to pull yourself back, as it
Hmm.
descends. And I just ended up mumbling and thinking, please God, let this interview finish. because it was a complete disaster. So maybe that's what set me on the path of of not liking interviews. One interview that was strange, and I actually got the job in this one, was that one of the interviewers fell asleep when they interviewed. They got a
Okay.
medical condition where they did just tend to, and as I was talking, he asked the question, and then he started to go off like this. I didn't know what to do. There was another person that wanted to carry talking. What? I actually got the job for that one. But that was one of the weirdest ones. Generally speaking, I don't think I ever fully got over the interview nerves.
Okay.
And as I said at the beginning, there's when I was at school, we did have, I don't actually think they gave us any mock interviews, to be
Mm.
honest with you. We had some careers talk, but that was from the local careers officer. And then there was nothing at college that we really had. And it would have been nice to have, I'm sure people like you and your business existed, but before social media, before the internet, it
Yeah.
was difficult to very often find people. And I think the view was that, well, you just did an interview and, you know, you learned and got better.
Yeah.
And certainly something like Toastmasters, I know it's been said often that people wish they'd learned about it earlier, and I do wish I had, because I've never had too much of a problem speaking in front of people, a group, where you know, like teaching.
Yeah.
People think, well, you can speak in front of a class, you must be good at an interview. Well, no, because
No.
the skills you use talking to a class are very different from an interview situation. And I really did struggle. But I think if I'd have known about Toastmasters, if I'd have, you know, you structure a speech beginning, middle, end, and you know, a piece of advice I learned too late from somebody at interviews is when you answer a question, tell them what you're going to say it, and then tell them what you've told them. You
Yeah.
know, and that's how you structure a speech. You say what you're going to say, you say it, and then you recap. And just having practice, as you know, in Toastmasters, feedback, you fed back on everything. You
Yeah.
know, and as we said earlier, you can stare at a mirror, you can record on a phone, but you need somebody to watch you to say, did you know you did this?
Yeah.
You kept saying this. For example, when I joined Toastmasters, because I've been a teacher, I was used to walking around the front of the classroom with my hand in my pocket and a board marker to write on the board. And I was a bit like that when I started Toastmasters, and somebody mentioned it in an evaluation and said, maybe take your hand out of your pocket and not play with a pen because they're distracting. Now that's absolutely simple things,
Yeah.
but they can help you. You know, you don't stand with your hands in your pockets in front of if you're presenting. You
Yeah.
don't fiddle with anything because it takes people's minds away. So that feedback, and just every meeting that you say something, whatever role you take, and people give you feedback, and you get better. One of the things I'm trying to work on at the moment is that I say so a lot. I don't know whether I've done it today. I am trying to work on that. So is a word, but
This.
sometimes it's too often used. So and sometimes when you give a feedback to somebody's speech, you say, well, I don't really know you were really good, but all of us can improve. Even
Yeah.
you know that thing about not putting your hand in your pocket in the front of or playing with a pen. That doesn't seem won't get you a job or not get you a job. But if you put it together with other things,
Yeah.
you could
It's the,
improve
it's
improve it
that
yourself.
compound factor, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's that little by little, a little becomes a lot. So it's all the
yeah,
compound and all of those
absolutely.
little things like feeling comfortable going in, having the right attitude from when you're starting to drive and when you get up in the morning to doing your preparation. It's
Mm,
all of those little things that compound and
absolutely.
accumulate
Mm,
to making life much easier for you on the day. And I think that's what a lot of people sort of feel that in regards to that lack of preparation and the lack of understanding that the interview starts when you receive the interview.
mm.
The interview probably started 6 months ago if it's an internal
Well,
job.
yeah. Yeah.
But the interview starts as soon as you receive the interview invitation. So, how do you reply to that? How do you organize your time? How do you research? Every single little tiny thing is
Mm.
important on the build up to that interview.
And it's also like we've said a couple of times, do things that are going to cause you less stress. So
Yeah,
if just a pair of comfy shoes
yeah,
is one thing that's not going to be on your mind. If you make sure you've got a pen,
yeah,
um, or you need some documents, make sure you've got those, because they're things that, small things, but like you say, compound. And if you've got them sorted, then you can focus at the interview on the big thing,
that's it.
getting the job, giving the answers,
That's it.
presenting to the different audiences,
Yeah,
which is what you should be doing, not sort of worrying about, oh, where's my pen, or
yeah.
have I brought that paper? And
Even the questions at the end, I would
yeah,
always recommend you write them down into a little notebook so
yeah,
that you can not
mm,
have to try and remember them throughout. Because
mm,
what people are thinking is, I'm trying to remember the questions I want to ask at the end, and I'm not really fully focused on the questions they're
yeah,
asking. So
absolutely.
you get lost, and that's where, people do get lost within interviews.
I
However,
know,
do the
I
simple
know.
things like you just said. Let's do the simple things. Let's write down the
Yeah.
questions, put them into our little notebook at the end, and say, "Do you have any questions for us?" I absolutely do. Let me grab my notebook there.
Yeah.
Bump.
And I think that's also another red flag if people don't ask questions.
Yeah,
Because one, it's saying that you've not really looked at us and not really bothered about us.
yeah,
If you can't think of some questions, it might be simple questions, but those questions that you ask show the interviewer, your audience, that you've thought about them
yeah.
and want to know more about it. And you're not just going to turn up, do the job, and go home. You've got you show a commitment. But
It's about
again,
attitude, isn't it?
and I have to
Attitude.
say, it's your audience. If there's anything that would sum up what I have to say about interviews, is think about your audience first. They're the ones that you've got to persuade to employ you. And the more you can know about them, the more you can know about their business or school, the better it makes it for you.
Well, Danny, thank you for that. That was going to be one of my main takeaways that I was going to share with our
Yeah.
audience, but you have summed that up absolutely beautifully. And I think you're 100% right. It is about the audience. The audience in this case being the interviewers, understanding exactly who they are, understanding the organization, the school, what people, and I know we shouldn't care too much about what other people think, but unfortunately, being the case of an interview, that is the case. And there is a little bit of judgment being taken upon that as well. So why, if you have it in your control to make them see you as you would like them to see you, then why would you not do that? It just makes real sense to do that. Another,
Absolutely.
yeah, and another takeaway I'm going to take away from this as well, and our listeners should take away is that during the breaks of an interview in a school, you're still being interviewed. Whether you're being brought round to show the school, how you interact with the students, how you interact with the cleaner, how you interact with the secretary, how you interact with the other teachers, it is all part of the interview process. And what did you say, Danny? You're always being watched, even on the way into the car park, even on the way out of the car park, you're always being watched.
Actually, I just want to share one little thing that's just sprung to mind. I went to a school, this was probably about 15 years ago, and it was a very liberal school. And the children were allowed in the staff room, and they shared the same toilet with the staff. So
Okay.
I was just thinking when you said, "Who's your audience?" I thought, well, at least you can nip into the loo and be yourself. But at that school, you couldn't because the kids were in there. And if you were, I don't know, going crazy in the toilet
Yeah.
to try to get rid of the stress, and one kid had walked in, that could have been reported to the interview.
Oh,
So I'm not trying to add extra stress, but and it's not just teaching, I can imagine that there's lots of businesses where there are lots of eyes on you and reporting back.
yeah.
In a hospital, maybe in a lawyer's firm,
Yeah.
they may look how people interact in the staff room, in the canteen,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So yeah, it has been, whether it's a right or wrong, that's the way it is. Because that in the end, you have to look at it from the school's perspective or the business perspective. They're investing in you, however much the wages are, but also, if they make the wrong decision, as I said, in a primary school, you've got one teacher for a year, and it's not easy to move a teacher. It's not easy to dismiss a teacher. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because you know you can't make it too easy to dismiss someone, because there's so many
Yeah.
facets to teaching. But if you are employing a class teacher, you've got the responsibility of 25, 30 kids and their education. If you pick the wrong person, you can ruin the education for a year for students.
Yeah.
So you've got to really look. Well, I'm sure a lot of your listeners are interviewers, so that, yeah, I'm not saying anything new, but you are investing a lot in somebody, and if
Yeah.
they're not up to the mark,
Yeah.
then
It's your responsibility as an interview
yeah,
panelist
yeah, absolutely.
to get that right person. And I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of talk and thought lost around the interview panel itself. And I know we were discussing about the interview candidate, but the responsibility for me lies a lot with the interviewers. And from my experience, a lot of these interviewers actually don't enjoy interviewing, nor have they been trained to do it
No,
correctly,
that's a good
nor
point.
have they actually,
Mm.
there's a want to do it.
I
So,
mean,
yeah,
yeah,
it's
no,
difficult.
I totally agree. And going back to schools, you can be interviewed by governors.
Yeah,
Now, governors, volunteers, the local councillors, the local business people, they may know how to interview, but they may not.
yeah.
And, I have been asked some stupid questions by people. And in one interview, I was asked, do I know anything about cars? I don't know. It's a teaching job. Why do I need to know about cars? Oh, well, it might give you something to talk about with the children. Oh,
Right.
okay. Well, fair enough. I can think of lots of things I could talk to them about other than cars, and I just thought that was a daft question.
Yeah.
I know
That's
how to steer it and where the petrol goes, and that's it.
well,
Um,
thank you very, very much for today. We've come to the end of our interview here, and I know a lot of our listeners are going to have loads of questions around what we've discussed, but there's been a lot of answers given here today also. But if they want to reach you, Danny, for a follow-up, where can they reach you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Danny Banks. I think you've got my LinkedIn.
Yeah. I'll share all of that on the show notes,
Thank you.
where you can find you can reach out to Danny and connect with Danny.
Yeah, I can give you my email. Can email me.
Okay.
That's fine. If anybody wants any help or to chat about things,
Perfect,
I
Danny.
can
Thank you
help in
very
any
much.
way. From the experience I've had with interviews, both sides.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
Danny, thank you very much for coming on today. It has been an absolute pleasure.
it's been really good to talk to you, Kevin, and I've enjoyed it. Yeah, I shall. I think I've learned a lot as well. So
Good.
that's a win-win, isn't it?
And thank you for coming on.
For more details about our guest, or if you would like to be a guest, go to www.interviewskillscoach.co.uk/my-worst-interview-ever, or find us on Facebook or LinkedIn. And remember, on the other side of a successful interview is the life you deserve.